We shouldn't be engineering families. Children have the right, as much as possible, to a mother and a father.
We've just seen Pauline Hanson very recently reiterate her support for same-sex marriage.
Distinguishes us from One Nation is our belief that the family, is the fundamental unit of a flourishing society. I don't think that's something that One Nation particularly prioritise or necessarily believe in.
Well, g'day and welcome. That conversation with the Honourable Jack Snelling about politics, religion and life and other small matters is coming up shortly. This will give you a deep insight into the heart and soul of the Family First Party and why we're determined to keep going despite the One Nation surge. There's some controversy and not everyone will like everything that we have to say, but I'd urge you to hear us out. That's coming up shortly, so don't go anywhere. In the meantime, I just want to say thanks so much for supporting my show. I hope you're liking the new format and the lift in production values. We're not quite Carl Stefanovic, but we're getting there. So please click like and subscribe and share this with absolutely everyone you know. Drop in a comment below and I'll do my best to respond. Well, speaking of Jack Snelling, he kindly wrote the foreword for my new book, Turn the Tide, and he spoke at the Sydney launch this week. Take a look.
In Turn the Tide, a letter to the Antipodean Church, Lyle asks why the Christian churches appear so reluctant to embrace ownership of our nation's Judeo-Christian heritage and assert its importance in the national conversation. Lyle argues for Christians to take their place in the public square in a robust engagement.
Our nation is going down the drain at a great rate of knots, and there's a responsibility that we have. It's almost like we need a war effort to have all shoulders to the wheel to save our nation, and I don't think that's hyperbole. I believe it's that serious. The good news is, if we rise and build, I do believe there's hope. I absolutely do. And we will see the tide turn in our nation. Well, next week I'll be on the road in southeast Queensland with the book, and I'd love to see you at one of the events. Details are on your screen. Go to turnthetide.au for more information. Well, as many of you will know, I'm running as Family First lead candidate for the New South Wales Legislative Council at the upcoming election in March 2027. We've fired another early shot in the campaign with this ad, which we'd love to put on TV. Take a look. Why is woke politics making your life hell? One thing, lack of courage. Politicians are afraid of their own shadows, running scared of noisy minorities. Fighting for your beliefs is costly. My office was firebombed, my family home address was published on the internet, and I've spent 6 years in court for saying that drag queens are not role models for children. You deserve someone who'll fight for faith, family, life and freedom. I'm Lyle Shelton. I'm here to put your family first.
Authorised by Lyle Shelton, Family First Party, Sydney.
Now, we want to reach as many people in New South Wales as possible. I need around 150,000 votes from the voters of New South Wales. That's around 3 to 5% of the statewide vote. It's not impossible, but it is difficult. But with your support, winning a seat in Parliament for faith, family, life and freedom is within reach. If you'd like to help, please go to the Family First Party website, familyfirstparty.org.au, and click on the New South Wales campaign appeal. The more help we can get, the more ads we can put on TV. In news that broke this week, Australian doctors are now openly discussing ways to get around restrictions designed to protect gender-confused children. A new unrestricted pharmaceutical benefits scheme listing for the drug triptorelin was justified on the basis of adult women's health conditions. That's fair enough. But radical child gender clinicians immediately celebrated this on Facebook as a way of getting puberty blockers to children in Queensland and the Northern Territory where there are some restrictions. Dr. Fiona Bishop called it the best news for trans youth in a long time. Now, this should set alarm bells ringing. Why any doctor would celebrate drugs that can chemically castrate children and put them on a lifelong path of medicalisation and mutilating surgery is unfathomable. But that goes to how deep LGBTQA plus gender fluid ideology has captured paediatric medicine in this country. But while this is happening in Australia, the US government under the Trump administration is going in the opposite direction. The US Department of Health and Human Services this week released a bombshell report called Wolves in White Coats, investigating how doctors and hospitals allegedly pushed and profited from so-called gender medicine, which is essentially experimenting on gender-confused children. The US President, J.D. Vance, says the report raises disturbing allegations that hospitals could turn vulnerable children into patients for life, generating tens of thousands of dollars in revenue per child. The Health Secretary, Robert F. Kennedy, and America's Assistant Secretary for Health, Admiral Brian Christine, are demanding accountability, and Vance has referred the matter for investigation. Take a look.
Today, HHS released Wolves in White Coats, a report examining pediatric gender medicine and insurance building across America. The findings raise serious questions about what families were told, what insurers were told, and how these procedures were built.
Today, Secretary Kennedy and I referred hospitals and clinics identified by this review to the Department of Justice and the HHS Inspector General for possible violations of federal law. These allegations are crazy, and they demand investigation. When children may have been harmed and families misled, it's on those of us in power to find the truth and to seek justice for kids who were harmed by these doctors.
Under the previous administration, my predecessor, Richard Levine, promoted what he called gender-affirming care for minors, and there's nothing caring about that. These are sex-rejecting, mutilating, transgender procedures promoted by the Biden administration, and thanks to President Trump's leadership, we're changing course.
Now notice something very important in that clip. Admiral Brian Christine referred to his predecessor as Richard Levine, not the transgender persona of Rachel Levine, which was the persona that he adopted when he was in that role. Now, that is courage and truth-telling from a government that is calling time on LGBTIQA+ political movements' harming of children. This has enormous implications for Australia. As this scandal deepens in America, Australian parents will also demand answers. Many of you will know my friend Kirralie Smith. She was a guest on this show a couple of weeks ago after she lost her appeal in the Supreme Court of New South Wales after she stood up for the rights of girls and women to have sport free of the encroachment of men who think they are women. Now, you'll recall that she was ordered to pay $95,000 in damages to two male soccer players who think they are women. All this because they said their feelings were hurt. The LGBTQA+ political movement doesn't debate, it litigates. And thanks to weak and woke Liberal and Labor politicians, the law is on the side of the activists. Now, it may come as no surprise that Kirralie has been the subject of multiple death threats. When she went into her local police station this week to report the latest threats, she was confronted with the police station displaying the rainbow flag of the LGBTQA+ political movement. Now, this is the flag that says children's gender is fluid and that men have every right to play as women on women's soccer teams and to go into their private spaces. Now, no one voted for this. Kirralie is getting death threats and court fines for calling it out. And yet, chillingly, the police fly a political flag that says Kirralie is a bigot and that she deserves to be punished. This is utterly outrageous. It's why I'm running as Family First lead candidate for the New South Wales Legislative Council. If I'm elected to Parliament, I'll be fighting to restore freedom of speech and to get political activism out of the police and other public institutions. Speaking of the violence coming from the LGBTQA+ political movement, here is the late Charlie Kirk being mocked at a drag show in the US.
It's not funny. Look at the blood. And the song is obviously bulletproof. It's not funny. It is rude. It's disrespectful to the family of Charlie Kirk.
Now remember, Charlie was murdered by a radical queer activist. Something powerful happened on the lawns of Parliament House this week. The Australian Christian Lobby laid out more than 10,000 hand-knitted baby booties in the shape of a cross, a confronting reminder of the human lives at stake in this tragedy of abortion. And the Nationals MP Lou O'Brien introduced his Human Rights Children Born Alive Protection Bill 2026, which would require babies who survive abortions to receive the medical care that any other newborn would receive.
Speaker, of the thousands of international treaties, conventions and agreements to which Australia has committed itself, surely those that protect the most vulnerable amongst us deserve the highest priority. Indeed, if every international obligation Australia had ever undertaken was swept away and only one could remain, for me, it would be the one that protects the fundamental human rights of our children. The Convention on the Rights of the Child is such an obligation. When Australia ratified the Convention in 1990, it became obliged under international law to recognise that every child has an inherent right to life and to ensure, to the maximum extent possible, that child's survival and development.
Around 150 babies are born alive following abortions in Australia each year. Congratulations to Lou O'Brien, Michelle Pearce and the ACL for refusing to let this issue disappear. As Australians learn more about what abortion actually involves, it is becoming harder and harder for politicians to look away and ignore its horrors. All babies deserve protection, and it goes without saying that a baby born alive after his or her abortion failed to kill him or her should be protected like any other patient in a hospital. Well, you might think the courts of all places would insist on biological facts, but now New Zealand courts have adopted the language of gender ideology describing male anatomy as belonging to a woman. That's right, folks, the term her penis must be used even in rape cases. Now, this is outrageous, but sadly, Australia got there first. Way back in April 2023, a New South Wales District Court judgment involving a male child sex offender who identified as a woman actually used the words her penis in court. Family First called this out at the time, but of course we were ignored. Courts exist to establish facts, not obscure them. When even our justice system is expected to pretend that men can be women, women and children are placed in a very dangerous position. When same-sex marriage was first instituted, LGBTQA+ activist and favourite of the ABC, Benjamin Law, said same-sex marriage was far from the last horizon in tackling what he called homophobia. Well, Benjamin, when the courts are using the phrase her penis, we are well and truly over the horizon. Well, I couldn't let this week's show go by without making some mention that this was a milestone week for Australia, with our Commonwealth debt now surpassing the $1 trillion mark. No one in politics has put forward a policy of getting us out of this mess. Our kids and grandkids will be paying it off for a very, very long time. It's another sign of the decline Liberal and Labor have put us in. I believe the tide can be turned, but politicians are going to have to start telling us the hard truths about what they have done to our nation, and then we're all going to need to find the resolve to work together to fix this mess. Well, it was my great pleasure to sit down earlier this week with the former long-time South Australian parliamentarian, former Health Minister and Treasurer, Jack Snelling. Jack's now a member of the Family First Federal Executive. We talk politics, faith and life. Enjoy. Well, it's great to have with me in the studio Jack Snelling, a member of the Federal Executive of the Family First Party and a former long-term Labor member of the South Australian Parliament, member for Playford, a former Treasurer and Health Minister and Speaker of the House. Jack, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Lyle. Great to be here.
I want to have a discussion today, Jack, about politics, life, Christianity and other small matters. You've grown up in the Labor tradition as a young person. Tell us about your formation as a young person into politics and what created the environment for your future career.
Oh, goodness. Where do I start? So I got involved in politics when I was started university, and I studied economics. My parents had been economics teachers, and so politics and economics were sort of common subjects around the family dinner table, and I guess that aroused my early interest. I was also interested in the pro-life movement. I met now Archbishop Anthony Fisher when he was still a student for the Dominican Order in the late 1980s, and he'd actually been a pro-life campaigner on a Sydney University campus in the early 1980s. He came to speak to us at the school. It was a Dominican school, a school run by the Dominican Fathers that I attended. So that aroused my interest in matters pro-life, but as well with my family background, I had a strong interest in politics. So when I started at Adelaide University, I did two things. I joined Young Labor,
and I also started the Adelaide University Pro-Life Club as well.
Interesting. Well, so you've just traversed a big part of your youth then. So you've revealed to us you grew up as a Catholic, I went to a Dominican school, came to faith fairly young, I take it?
Yeah, well, that's right. Well, I was baptised a Catholic and raised a Catholic. My mum, was and my grandparents are very devout, and made sure we went to mass every Sunday.
Was there a point though when you owned your faith for yourself?
It's a very Protestant question, Lyle. I don't know if you've seen, there's a video of Archbishop Fisher saying, you're talking about when he found Jesus, and he was, he says in this clip, there was a point in his life when he was just completely self-centered. He just lived for the next drink, and then at age of 3 weeks he was baptised and found Jesus.
Now, for our listeners who are wondering what this banter is all about, my friend Jack here is a Roman Catholic. I'm someone of a product of the Reformation, I suppose, but I'm probably the Catholic Church's biggest friend in Protestantism. That's how I describe myself.
Indeed.
I love the body of Christ. You mentioned Anthony Fisher. He, of course, is the Archbishop of Sydney, and I think a great man in Australia in terms of leadership in the church. So that's interesting that he had a role in helping form your faith and also your pro-life views, which of course have led to action in politics as well.
Yeah, as well. And as well as that, there was one of the Dominican priests at Blackfriars, another who was a great early mentor for me. In those days, I was probably consider myself a bit of a lefty, particularly on issues like the Republic. I've always been pro-life, but and he and I would have long debates about these sorts of issues. He was far more conservative than I was at that stage, but he was a great influence and a great mentor for me as well.
It's really important to have these sort of discussions, because I think so many of us who we're political junkies, and let's face it, politics is not everyone's bag. I think everyone should take an interest in politics, but people like you and I who love politics and have been around it a long time, you can trace these sort of conversations that you're describing back to our youth and teenage years where, a mentor, a church leader or some other political figure came into our life.
Yeah, no, for sure.
Jack, you also, so tell us about your formation in the Labor Party then. What got you interested? You mentioned you're a bit of a lefty. You've had a long career in Labor politics and the union movement. What gave rise to that in your youth?
There was a terrible program on the ABC in the late 1980s called True Believers, and it was a representation of the events in Australian federal politics from sort of the death of Curtin to the split in the Labor Party in the mid 1950s. It was very sympathetic, I guess, to those to the left wing of the Labor Party, and hostile to the part of the Labor Party that ended up forming the Democratic Labor Party. And I remember this particular Dominican priest. He'd actually he was from New South Wales. His father was actually secretary of the DLP. Had been secretary of the DLP in New South Wales. He actually knew B.A. Santamaria. And we were having a debate about True Believers and its historical accuracy. And he said, "Well, you should meet. I can arrange for you to meet B.A. Santamaria." And I was just I think in my first year of university, so it was just and I went with him to Melbourne, and he arranged for me to meet with him. So it was a great opportunity to meet such an historic figure. And I think that's another thing that had a significant influence on me.
Very interesting. Now, again, there will be people listening and watching this that will have no idea what the split was, or who B.A. Santamaria was, but what he did was seminal in Australian politics, and it still reverberates to this day. Just explain for people what the split was, what gave rise to it, and I guess some of the virtues of Santamaria and the sort of leadership that he showed for so many decades that really shaped this nation. Yeah.
So. In the 1940s, there was an advance of the communists in the Australian trade union movement, and indeed it had become a problem for the Labor government. There had been rolling strikes, and it was a particularly controversial time when Ben Chivley had to send the soldiers in to operate the mines because the communist unionists were on strike, and this created a threat to Australia's national security. So this had been a rolling issue in Australia with steady encroachment of communists in the trade union movement, taking over trade unions, and a number of people, not all Catholic, but a significant number of them were Catholic trade unionists, decided to organise to, I guess, try and fight this communist influence in the trade unions through the normal electoral process in the union. So when there was an election on, they would organise and campaign to retake the unions off of communist control. So and they were very successful. And as they became more successful, they wielded more and more power within the Australian Labor Party, to the point where the then leader of the Labor Party, H.V. Evatt, who had been courting the industrial groups up until that point, turned on them quite suddenly and quite viciously, and many of them were expelled. Others left the Labor Party, and they formed the Democratic Labor Party, which between 1955 and the early 1972 effectively kept Labor out of government by preferencing the Liberal Party ahead of Labor. It was a very bitter and acrimonious time in the history of the Labor Party.
And of course, Robert Menzies reigned supreme during that period, or for most of that period, as a result of the split. It's interesting, we've got a split on the centre-right of politics now, with One Nation fracturing the coalition vote, and history may well be repeating itself. But just, I think this is a fascinating period of Australian history. The threat of communism was real, and the fact that communism was infiltrating Australia's trade union movements in the labour movement, when you had a nuclear-armed USSR, which was very much expansionist, this was quite a horrifying thing. And of course, B.A. Santamaria saw the threat and tried to do something about it, because it was potentially existential for Australia.
Yeah, it was a significant. You've got to remember the significant threat, and you've got to remember, at the time, countries in Eastern Europe were being puppet communist regimes were being installed in countries like Czechoslovakia and Poland and Hungary, and so the
Southeast
USSR
Asia
had
as well.
in Southeast Asia as well.
Yeah.
So you had an expansionist communist policy, and it hadn't been that many years earlier that the Soviet Union had been in a pact with the Nazis to split Poland up. These weren't good guys.
No.
These were not like that much earlier had been Nazi collaborationists, and Santamaria saw the threat that they posed, and while not sort of directing the industrial groups, was heavily involved and a close advisor.
And he saw the threat too, not just from a national security and a defence perspective, and the fact that Australia could potentially end up like one of these Eastern European puppet countries potentially, but it was also a moral threat as well, because communism was aggressively atheistic and anti-family.
Yeah, indeed, and certainly, the church suffered in those countries where the communists had taken control, and priests were murdered, faithful were murdered or imprisoned. So it wasn't a good time for religious freedom or good place to be if you were a person of faith.
I shouldn't be chasing every rabbit down the hole, but you mentioned Doc Evatt, and that he turned against Santamaria and the industrial groups which were trying to save the Labor Party from this communist threat. Doc Evatt is he was a foreign minister of Australia. He was a Secretary General of the United Nations. Played a key
had been president
of the
United Nations Security Council. Yeah.
Okay. So, right. Okay. Thanks for that. But he was a towering figure in the post-war development of multilateralism and what became of the UN. And also very significant in the formation of the State of Israel too, which is very ironic given that the modern left demonise Israel. One of Labor's heroes was instrumental there. But so what was the basis of his opposition then to what Santamaria was trying to do? Surely he would have seen the communist threat and would have wanted to have been on the right side of that, I would have thought.
Hard to speculate what was going on in his heart. I mean, he was a very mercurial figure, and I think in terms of his personality, someone who could be your best mate one moment and turn on you very quickly. So I think it was partly down to his personality, but I think within some elements of the Labor Party, not necessarily the extreme left, but there was a concern about how powerful and influential the industrial groups were becoming, and wanting to, I guess, clip the wings of the industrial of the what we call the industrial groups who are doing this sort of work. They weren't, and I suspect at the time there's probably a bit of sectarianism involved as well. I mean, these groups were predominantly Catholic, not exclusively, but there were. But they were predominantly Catholic.
So some complex things at play.
I think there were a lot of complex things going on.
Yeah, interesting. Okay, so that's interesting. So the DLP, Santamaria, you got to meet the great man. That was seminal in your formation, your political formation. So you go to Adelaide University, study economics, and you're involved in political activism on campus. You meet someone called Penny Wong.
Yes, I did, and I think I'm so, as well as Young Labor, there was a Labor club at university, and I think Penny was actually one of the first people I ever met in the ALP, ever spoke to, and you know.
Are you still speaking today?
No, I haven't spoken to her for many years, but I mean, we don't have a more necessarily acrimonious relationship.
But you parted company over your pro-life activism on campus, essentially.
Well, yes. So, as I said earlier, when I started a pro-life club at Adelaide University, I'd heard that in other universities around the country that moves had been done to do this, and I thought it would be good to do it at the University of Adelaide. I was also vice president of the Labor Club at the same time, and Penny and others in the left thought that these two roles were somewhat incompatible, and I'd argued, that in the Labor Party abortion was a conscience vote, and I had as much right as anyone else to set up a pro-life club. But anyway, there was sort of infighting within the Labor Club to have me dumped, and Penny was one of the leading people in that.
Was she engaging the merits of your debate? Would she debate the merits of the pro-life versus so-called pro-choice
No, I don't
position?
think so. It really was. It really was more an issue that the pro-life argument or protection for the unborn is not an argument that could be respectably advanced on university campus. And I remember during orientation week 1 year, we had been able to get a set of models of unborn babies from conception through to 9 months, showing the development of the baby, which we had on display on the stall, and there were moves to force us to remove those models because they were considered offensive. I mean, given the sort of things that are shown on university campus, entirely biologically correct models of unborn babies somehow are considered offensive. But fortunately, the president of the Student Association at the time, Natasha Stotospoya, did believe in freedom of speech, and so she resisted that push to force us to remove those models.
And again, for listeners and viewers who, Jack and I are very old, we're talking about people from
a long time ago.
A long time ago. Yeah. Natasha Stotospoya obviously went on to become the leader of the Australian Democrats, a political party which held the balance of power in the Senate for a long time and is now defunct. But she was a bit of a lefty, but good on Natasha for at least in those days the lefties stood up for freedom of speech.
There were at least some lefties to be found who believed in freedom of speech. That's right.
Yeah, but unfortunately, at least Penny Wong, though, as a lefty, has been consistently against freedom of speech. That was an early form of cancel culture.
I think so, yeah.
So you studied economics. You then moved on to a career in the Shoppies Union. Tell us about the Shoppies Union, because they have been one of Australia's biggest trade unions and very influential in Australian labour politics and politics in general.
Yeah, well, they had originally been one of these industrial group unions that I was talking about. And had left, disaffiliated from the Labor Party in the wake of the split. And then it was only in the 1980s when Bob Hawke was leader of the Labor Party that these former unions, industrial group unions that had not been affiliated, started to re-affiliate and come back into the Labor Party. So the SDA was one of them, many of the leaders at that time had been involved, in the early years of the split. So Senator Brian Harradine, Tasmanian senator, he was originally from South Australia, But Brian had been a secretary of the Shoppers' Union in Tasmania. A fellow called Jim Marr, who was the secretary of the Shoppers' Citizens Union in Victoria, and they re-affiliated. In fact, such was the vitriol that in the first state conference of the Victorian Labor Party, where the SDA turned up, tomatoes were thrown at Jim Marr when he turned up. So yeah, passions are still very, very much at the forefront.
That's fascinating. I didn't realise I didn't realise that backstory of the SDA, which stands for Shop Distributive
and Allied Employees Association.
And they were and maybe still are the biggest trade union in Australia. They're certainly right up there in terms of membership.
Probably the biggest private sector union. They might not be the biggest. The PSA
of course,
and so on. Public sector unions might be larger, but I think they'd be the biggest private sector union.
And look, I'm someone from the conservative side of politics, and probably generally have an anti-union disposition, but I think the shoppies have done great work in advocating for good wages and conditions. My boys worked as checkout people at Coles in West End in Brisbane, and they were grateful for the union ensuring that they had good wages and conditions.
So absolutely. Good union.
Now, Joe de Bruin is a figure who, up until very recently, led that union for many, many years, and it was known for bringing some, I guess, social conservative ballast into the Labor Party. They really held the line on pro-life issues and in the same-sex marriage debate. And of course, you were very involved in the SDA and that social conservative wing of Labor. What's happened to it now?
Well, I think the problem the Labor Party has is its membership is very much out of kilter with its support base. So if you look at a map and look at where the Labor Party votes are, they're in the outer suburbs, they're among lower socioeconomic groups, and you could put a sort of heat map on where the Labor vote is, and it's going to be out at Mount Druitt in Sydney, or in Salisbury and Elizabeth in Adelaide. But if you were to transpose upon to that where the Labor Party membership is, it's clustered around the inner suburbs. So, I can't speak for Sydney, but I imagine it's similar. But in South Australia, the biggest Labor Party branches are Adelaide, Norwood and Unley, the three inner suburban electorates.
Wealthy
and
people.
Branches, people who are on the wealthy end of the spectrum. The smallest branches, other than the country, are actually where the Labor Party vote is highest. And so you'll find that the rank and file of the Labor Party, the ordinary membership of the Labor Party, its values and priorities don't line up with the values and priorities of the people who actually vote for the Labor Party. And I think that's a problem, an existential problem for the party. I don't think you can continue running a political movement where its membership is so much out of tune with the people it relies upon to keep it in office. Yeah,
it's generally the working people who don't have the luxury of luxury beliefs, I suppose. Yeah.
No, indeed.
So you went from the Shoppies Union. We're probably skipping over some things in your life, but you that led to a opportunity to run for Parliament, and you became a member of the South Australian Legislative Assembly, the lower house, at the age of 24, very young.
It was very young, probably too young, but I did have that opportunity. I'd recently been married. Lucia was pregnant with our first child, and I'd been working for a federal MP and had the opportunity to, a member of Parliament was stepping down, he was retiring, and I had the opportunity to take his place.
Was that exciting as a 24-year-old?
It was very exciting, yeah.
Why is that? What hopes and dreams did you have as a 24-year-old Jack Snelling entering the heady parliamentary chamber with the red leather, the green leather?
I don't be too misty-eyed about it.
No, get misty-eyed, Jack. We love that.
And pretend that I had some great vision.
You would have been a young. You would have been a young idealist, though, surely, like all of us at that age.
No, I was pretty hard and cynical.
That's because you'd come up through the Labor Party.
That's right, nothing's changed. But look, I love politics, and just the opportunity to do something I loved, and to get paid for it, to make a living out of doing something that I really, really enjoyed, was, I guess, partly, a big part of what was exciting for me. Obviously, I had, policies I wanted to advance. in those days I was pretty skeptical about economic rationalism and the effect that it was having in communities, where we had industries closing down, and people pulled out of work, and in particular, job opportunities for that were well paid enough for a breadwinner to be able to support a family were disappearing, and the workforce was being increasingly casualised. So I was interested in that, and obviously I was also interested in issues around bioethics, abortion, obviously, but there was already talk of embryo experimentation and cloning and all those sorts of things, which I had a deep interest in as well.
I remember those bioethical debates very well, and you mentioned Brian Harradine earlier. He played a key role in the Australian Senate when, under John Howard, the Liberal Party introduced legislation allowing human embryos that were discarded from IVF to be experimented on, and I remember Brian Harradine leading the charge against that.
Indeed, yeah. Brian was a great man, and his presence in the Parliament is sorely missed.
Yep. You also mentioned economic issues. What you've just described about your scepticism over economic rationalism, of course, this was the 90s, I presume, when you were elected. Or was it early 2000s?
Late 90s.
Late 90s. Yeah. So we've been through the Hawke Keating years, Thatcherism, Reaganism, so privatisation, free trade, all of these sort of things, which led to a lot of increase in productivity and a lot of wealth being built, but also a lot of casualties. And Santamaria always knew this, didn't he? From the 1950s, he championed. You help me understand his economics, because he wasn't a socialist, but he wanted capitalism to be tempered to protect the family and to protect.
He was a great critic of financial deregulation, which the Hawke government undertook in the early 1980s. He was a critic of reducing protection, particularly unilaterally reducing protection. He thought that Australia needed a manufacturing industry, and it was not wise to essentially outsource that to low-wage economies. So he had complex, I think, complex, nuanced maybe rather than complex points of view about economics. But he was a polymath. I mean, he was so well read, and he understood the subject, probably a lot better than I do.
I think this discussion is really important, because here we find ourselves now in a situation where a country like Australia and the US, and I think this is what's been giving rise to perhaps the Trump, the MAGA movement, the concern here in Australia, where our supply chains are all really stretched. We've offshored so much of our manufacturing, our car industry, where you're from in South Australia. That's been obliterated. We don't have sovereign capability for defence manufacturing, even and even fertiliser and fuel. All of this is stretched because of free market deregulation and economic rationalism. And suddenly we're realising, well, maybe people like Santamaria were right all along.
I think that at the end of the Cold War, there was a naive belief that internationalism and would continue indefinitely. That there would never be, free trade was the best way to go. You didn't need to worry about getting goods that goods could always freely flow between nations, what we've seen over the last sort of 5-10 years is that is not necessarily the case, particularly in the last sort of 6 months with the war in Iran. And it does raise the question, do we need, is it really worth, saving, having cheaper T-shirts or cheaper shirts or cheaper cars, if it means that you don't actually have that capability yourself. And particularly, in the event, Australia was to go to war, we would be entirely dependent upon other countries to supply, the basic materials we need.
Absolutely. So suddenly we're waking up and realising that perhaps all this deregulation and free trade wasn't, perhaps it needed perhaps a more nuanced approach. It's undoubtedly brought productivity benefits and prosperity, but at what cost? We've lost these capabilities, and so many families have been put out of work. There's been a human cost to offshoring our manufacturing capability as well.
Well, and I think for family first, where our vision for a society is one built on the family, where there's an opportunity to have a one breadwinner per family who's able through that wage to be able to support a partner and independent, or spouse and dependent children. The jobs that can do that don't really exist anymore, other than the public sector. Those jobs have largely disappeared. We've seen a massive casualisation of the workforce. It is practically impossible now to support a family on one wage, and that's to the detriment, I think, of our society. And I think we need to look. All right, well, how do we make the economy work for people rather than people working for the economy? Yeah,
well said. We'll come back to Family First in a moment, but that's very much part of our vision for human flourishing. Just back to your career, then you became the Treasurer of South Australia again. Still reasonably young, and then Health Minister. Tell us what it was like as a youngish dad with a family. You've got 6 children all up. Working at such a high level and high pace in public service, what was that like?
Well, it was particularly difficult on my wife. She had to carry much of the load, and my eldest daughter says now that she remembers going to bed and I wasn't home yet, and she would wake up and I'd already left for work. So it was long days and very demanding, and demanding on me emotionally and as well. I mean, I did always try to make sure that I did allocate time for the family and for the children. I tried to make sure I was always home in the evening as much as I possibly could be. But it put an enormous load on my children. My children had to grow up in the shadow of my political career, I feel a bit of remorse that happened.
Yeah, I think it's really important that youngish people at the height of their sort of professional abilities, been through university, hopefully had some life experience and family experience, that they can hold high office in state and federal parliaments. But we should be able to find a way for this to happen that doesn't mean they have to sacrifice their families as well. Maybe we've got to find a way to, keep Sundays separate so that can be for family and at least a break from the media and social media and emails and all of that sort of thing. Is that a bit naive to think that we could get to a kinder and gentler pace so that we can benefit from the experience of people in the prime of their life to hold these positions?
Well, I think it's important for us politically to have representation from a broad representation in our parliament. And that does mean that you're going to have men and women who have young children represented in the parliament. I think it would require a significant cultural change for parliament to become truly family friendly, and just the demands of the media and the expectations are so high. And particularly, the people I really always felt sorry for, members of parliament with young families who live in Perth, who have to travel to Canberra. They're away. At least most nights I was home. I might, even if the children had gone to bed, at least I was home. But for those MPs, federal MPs, I honestly don't know how they do it.
I think we've got to rethink this whole thing, not just for politics, but everyone's life is too frenetic, and I don't think anything's that important that everyone in society can't have a day off, and we can at least stop and pause. And I don't think we'd lose any productivity. We'd probably gain productivity from it.
There certainly is a culture of just doing stuff for the sake of doing stuff, without really, is this important? Do I really need to do this?
That's right.
And just sort of producing content for the sake of producing content. Not that anyone's going to read it or take any notice, but just, I've got to be there. I've got to be out there. Otherwise I won't get, I'll be passed over. I won't get noticed.
Holding office of Treasurer and Health Minister, you got a pretty good look at how a state's finances work, how one of the most complex and difficult portfolio issues in health works, and some of the intractable issues there. What were some of the issues you were trying to deal with, first in Treasury and state finances and health, the challenges that our governments face that we're still trying to nut through today?
Well, I think part of the problem, and it's partly the politicians themselves. We have an attitude we've developed this sort of attitude, modern attitude, that the government's got to solve every problem. And in some ways, politicians sort of love this and they hate this. They love it because it means they get to go in and solve problems, spending taxpayer money. But it's not a good attitude. For one thing, it disempowers ordinary people from solving their own problems. If constantly we're turning to government to fix our problems, but as well, it just places such a burden on taxpayers and upon governments that they can't possibly keep up with it. And so the expectations of our health system are just way beyond what, and increasingly way beyond what we can afford.
How do we solve that then? I mean, we all want a good health system. We want it to be there. We want it to be free, if at all possible. Is it just not possible to have a gold-plated health system?
Well, I think it's going to become increasingly difficult as the population ages and as the demand for our health services increase. I mean, technology will help to some extent, and so that there've been advances, procedures that once you would have had to spend 5 or 6 nights in a hospital 20 years ago now can be done as day surgery. So there are all sorts of advances being made all the time which will help. But there is an underlying problem. I mean, our whole way of government is predicated upon a growing population, right? and a reasonably high birth rate, so that you always have the number of taxpayers relative to the number of net recipients of government care sort of remains stable. But that's no longer the case, and increasingly not going to be, and that places a massive burden on the state that we can't possibly keep up. And so, that's why we have this massive debt crisis in at a state and federal level.
How do we solve that?
I wish I knew.
After 20 years in Parliament and holding ministerial offices, you don't have some clues, or
well,
is it?
I'm not sure this is a solution, but I think people have to readjust their expectations about what government's going to be able to provide, and seek. Discover ways in which they can, through their families and communities, can start looking after themselves and those they love. So to a large extent, people are going to have to start looking after their own aged parents. They're just not going to be enough aged care places for everyone. People are. With regard to institutional childcare, we're going to have to change those arrangements. We can't just keep handing over. I guess
outsourcing everything
to government. The things that used to be done within families and within communities.
This is interesting because prior to the rise of the welfare state, countries like Australia relied on lots of voluntary organisations, church organisations, but other community groups which used to see these needs and fill them.
Exactly.
You talk about the principle of subsidiarity. That's where we as a society, as a community, do things, and the government only does what the community can't do for itself. We've got to get back to a form of that, it seems.
Well, that's right. And the irony is, government isn't necessarily that good at it.
Yeah.
The welfare system is pretty broken, the government isn't very good at making sure that assistance is directed towards those who need it the most. These things are best managed at a local level as possible, whether that be through families supporting each other and supporting their members, or through small community-based charities.
This is going to require a big mind shift in society. We've become so individualised, haven't we, and atomised. We've seen the breakdown of community, the breakdown of families, tragically. People are more and more isolated, and yet because of the unsustainable strain on government services because of these expectations, we're going to have to reorientate the way we relate to one another again through family and through the wider ties that bind in our local communities. So that's going to create a significant shift.
It's going to be a massive change.
Yeah.
In the way we think.
It'll be forced on us, won't it?
I can't see any other way how it can end.
Yeah.
Eventually the government's not going to be able to borrow any more money. I mean, international lenders will not. The interest rates they expect to be so prohibitive.
Yeah.
Government just won't be able to keep up. And the problem is that political culture is one of kicking the can down the road when no one wants to really deal with this problem at a political level. Much prefer let the next generation of politicians sort it so the problem continues to get worse and worse.
Yep.
And I think you're right. We'll get to that stage where governments can't borrow any more money, and it's going to be communities who can support themselves and families who can provide that support themselves that are going to survive.
Federally, we're in $1 trillion worth of debt. The budget forecasts are for a decade of debt and deficit. I'm not sure what South Australia's debt is at the moment, but Victoria, they're paying $24 million per day on interest alone. Most state governments are in a similar position. Victoria's the worst, but the others are not far behind.
Yep.
So cumulatively, Commonwealth and state debt, we're heading for a crunch time.
I think so. I can't see any other way around it. I mean, I would love to be able to say otherwise, that it can be turned around, but I'm not sure it can. And, I think community expectations as well have moved on. There's not really much of a culture of honesty with politicians and with the electorate. I mean, you don't, I've got lots of criticism of Jeff Kennett, but he was honest. He was a realist. Did what needed to be done in Victoria to try to rescue the state finances and turn it around. I don't see any Jeff Kennetts in the modern Liberal Party.
This is very interesting. You and I were both recently at the Alliance for Responsible Citizenship conference in London, which is seeking to try and address some of these civilisational issues around economics and social policy. But one of the key speakers there for the past few years has been Konstantin Kisin, and he constantly says politicians need to actually level with people and tell them the truth. And he's coming from a position of the United Kingdom, which of course is an absolute basket case in terms of its debt and social the social fracture that's going on there. This is the thing that we are going to have to face up to. Our politicians are not giving us the reality of the situation and the crisis that we're in and the adjustments that we're going to have to make. And I don't see any leadership on the horizon that's willing to tell us the truth at the moment in either the Coalition or Labor.
Not really. I mean, for the last 20, 30 years, political parties have adopted a small target strategy. It's been very, and the Liberal Party have been burnt. When they have tried to level with the electorate. So I can understand why they're reluctant to go down that path. But the problem is, no one on either side is willing to level the electorate, and we're all going to pay for that.
No, well, and people, as we talk about, Labor and the Coalition, people will be saying, well, One Nation is rising up and at least they're doing it. But I think they're essentially articulating grievances, which are legitimate grievances, but I'm not sure that they have the solution. The solutions are complex, as we're discussing, and they are going to involve having to tell hard truths and for the population to make some hard choices that are going to impact their lifestyle. Now, One Nation aren't even preparing us for that. They're just kicking everyone, rightly so. They deserve the kicking, but the leadership to provide the solutions and the conversation with the population about the adjustments we're going to take, that leadership isn't being given at the moment. I think that's the real vulnerability in Australian politics at the moment.
I think you're right, and I don't see that leadership coming from One Nation. I think you're right. They're essentially a party that knows what they're against and good on them, but they don't have a positive vision that their membership can coalesce around. They don't have an alternative vision for Australia. They can't actually tell you, well, this is Australia we want. They know the Australia they don't want, which is great, but but it's more than that, political leadership.
Well, that's right, and as much as I admire Pauline Hanson's courage, and I think the disruption she's brought has been necessary because we couldn't keep going the way we're going, but she doesn't have a clear vision. I mean, she supports same-sex marriage, she supports most abortions, she's against late term. That's good. She's on a journey. Commend her for that. But unless she's willing to tell people the hard truths and say, look, we are going to have to, get back to heterosexual monogamous marriage to provide the best environment for the flourishing of children and promote that in public policy, there's going to be a lot of Australians who are hedonistic and who are individualistic, who aren't going to like those sort of messages that are going to be required to get us back to a social cohesion which can start to deal with some of these issues at their root cause.
Yeah, no, that's exactly right.
Yeah. So, Jack, 20 years in Parliament, you retire in your 40s. Where a lot of people are just going into Parliament at that time. Why did you decide to pull the pin?
For a few reasons. I really was sort of genuinely burnt out, and I'd had enough. I had been contemplating it for a little while. My last 4 years as a minister, I'd really struggled with whether to continue in the ministry or not. I think I made the mistake in continuing. I probably would have been better off for me and my family if I'd stepped down at that stage. I might still be in Parliament if I'd made that decision.
Take a bit of time on the back bench for a few.
Yeah, indeed. It had been hard. The first 4 years had been hard. Anyway, I continued on. So by the end of that second 4 year block as being a minister, I was completely a bit shattered. And we'd been building the new Royal Adelaide Hospital, and so that had been very, very difficult. We'd tried to undertake a significant reform, controversial reform of the South Australian health system. So that had been, and there'd been as well the normal crises that you have in the health portfolio.
Yeah, you were getting beaten up by the Adelaide Advertiser a bit.
The Adelaide Advertiser were not my friends. So, I know I was in the media every day. I probably was getting more media coverage than the Premier at the time, and that takes its toll. And it was taking a toll on my family, and that's why I just felt the call from God, that this was something that there might be something else He wanted me to do, and I was sort of at a stage of my life where I had to think, well, do I just want to spend my entire working life in as a member of South Australian Parliament doing whatever, or was God calling me to do something different? And I had a strong sense, I didn't know what that different thing was, but a strong sense that He was calling me to do something different. And much to my wife's relief, I made that decision.
It's a very brave decision, and so that's led you to involvement in Christian charitable work, helping people in the developing world, and also in the establishment of a school to help form young people to be better citizens.
Yeah, so I've got sort of three projects, I guess. One is Bright Futures Child Aid and Development Fund, which was founded by a very dear friend of mine. It's a Christian overseas aid organisation. We support projects in Uganda, Kenya, and India, and it's just I'm in a part-time role leading that organisation, but that's tremendously fulfilling, particularly the opportunity to visit these countries and see the projects and see the work being done. It's just and lovely just to work in a Christian organisation as well, is beautiful. And obviously my work with Family First and St Benedict's School is a school I co-founded 3 years ago now, which is a classical school for children from reception to year 6. We're hoping to go beyond year 6 from next year. We're just seeking regulatory approval to do that.
Explain classical school.
I was worried you're going to ask that question, Lyle. So I guess a lot of people, when they think of classical school, they think of sort of a return to pre-modern education. And they think of it as the sort of historical classroom, kids all facing the front and rote learning and so on. And that's part of it, but it's not the essence of it. I think the essence of it is virtue formation, so encouraging the formation of the child. But I think as well, the essence of it actually is to see the logos in creation. So by that I mean, an example I would give most modern schools, if you go around, you see schools advertising. They're always talking about their great facilities and their the latest in technology and computing power and so on that children have access to, and the thinking is there that by doing that you'll equip children for the workforce and they'll move seamlessly into a high-tech future. We take a very different approach. We actually we don't have technology in the school, and whereas in modern education you teach the theory and then you apply the theory, we go the other way around. So we encourage children, I guess, to see to see the laws of nature and in practice in the real world, and to see those laws, because so in something like so in a subject like mathematics, rather than being taught the laws of mathematics and then seeking to apply them, we actually start with the real world and get the children to see the laws of mathematics in the real world, because that way they can see God working through creation and how there is meaning and order in the universe, and helps, I guess, to address that crisis that we have among our young people, in that the crisis of meaninglessness, and the prevailing belief that we're just matter and energy and nothing else, and we teach the children to see that we're not just matter and energy, that there is meaning and there is order, and that order comes from a loving creator.
And there's meaning and order because it's clear there's a mind behind the order in the universe.
Yes, indeed.
No, very good. No, I think that's a very hopeful project. I know St Benedict's is a primary school at the moment. You might go into secondary, who knows, but...
Yeah, well, we've got an application to offer years 7 to 9, so we're just waiting to hear back.
And there's a lot of schools now, particularly in the United States, but also starting to happen in Australia, that are into this sort of classical liberal arts type educational approach. The school that I went to in Toowoomba in Queensland now teaches in the liberal arts tradition, and this is helping young people understand the traditions of the great books, obviously theology, philosophy, this sort of thing, which has been sorely neglected in recent times, contributing to this crisis of meaning.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, so an important part of it as well is, reading the great books, because they have eternal truths to teach us and to teach children. And so, similarly to seeing the laws of mathematics and creation, also to see the laws of human relationships within, in the great books and the great literature of the past. Yeah,
I think this is rehumanising people, and I think there's a long way to go in all this, but I think our education system has dumbed everyone down and made us utilitarian projects for a capitalist.
Well, that's right. Yeah, like modern schooling is essentially, the children are seen as sort of economic units. And we've got to give them the latest skills so that they can go into the workforce and learn skills that are supposedly relevant. But of course, that's not enough to flourish. Humans need more than just to be a unit within an economy to flourish as
And that's not
individuals.
because we're a couple of leftist collectivists who are trying to go back to some sort of Marxist utopia, but we're talking about nuance and balance.
Oh, sorry.
Let's move on from there. Speaking of great books, this book here is by someone who was a friend of yours. Well, it's a collection of his essays, Christopher Pearson. Tell us about Christopher Pearson, because I think he's a very fascinating figure in Australia. He's now passed away, unfortunately. He used to write a column in The Australian, which I used to read a lot. But you became friends with him.
Yeah, we met with him through a mutual friend, Father Ephraim Chifley. And so Father Ephraim was a Dominican priest who was in Adelaide at the time, and Christopher and I became great friends, and Christopher converted to Catholicism. I was his sponsor when he converted, and we were friends for many years. He was an interesting character. He'd grown up in the 1970s. He had been a campaigner for the legalisation of homosexuality.
He was a same-sex attracted man himself. Of course,
he was a gay man, and somewhat of a bohemian. But I think, and he wrote an essay in the 1990s called The Dubious Business of Coming Out, where he talked about his own experience, and particularly he was critical of, I guess, political homosexual activism, which pressured people or pressured men to come out and publicly declare their homosexuality, whether they wanted to or not. And he was very critical of that, and very critical, I guess, I think, of homosexuality as an identity. That your whole being somehow revolves around your sexual preference. He saw that as incidental, not an essence to your personality. So he was critical of those people who saw it as essential to your personality. So he became increasingly conservative over the years, and of course became great friends with Tony Abbott and a speechwriter to John Howard.
Amazing, yeah. I remember his voice. In fact, we had some interaction with him when I was at Australian Christian Lobby in the years leading up to the same-sex marriage debate. Of course, he passed away a few years before the 2017 plebiscite, but he would write very eloquently about why marriage should be preserved between a man and a woman. And coming from a gay man, that was incredibly powerful, and the left didn't like that at all.
No, they didn't, yeah.
But he was far more than someone defined by his sexual identity. He was, as you say, a bohemian. He was a terrific writer. He edited a publication called the Adelaide Review, which was quite legendary. He understood culture and just had a great turn of phrase.
Yeah, he did. And the Adelaide Review was very popular at the time. It was essential reading in Adelaide. Copies of it, free copies of it, were made available in pubs and cafes around Adelaide and beyond. It always had a beautiful cover. He always insisted that the cover be a piece of art from the collection of the South Australian Art Gallery or somewhere else. And the writing was always excellent. He published poetry of Les Murray frequently in the Adelaide Review. I think might even have been the main outlet for Les's poetry. So and had great restaurant reviews and great writing, and it was an excellent publication.
We've lost the aesthetic of good artwork and good writing, and the combination of both. Better Class of Sunset, which is the title of the collection of his writings, which you had a hand in producing with Connor Court. Tell us about that phrase.
Well, it's in one of Christopher's essays where he's talking about, Christopher wasn't a great fan of the beach and beach culture. And in this essay, he talks about that it's best to the beach can be best enjoyed in winter, and he says, and you have in winter you get a better class of sunset.
What a beautiful observation! It's true. Anyone who's been to the beach in winter will realise that the light is brighter, and I just love the fact that a man can observe that and then put that into such a pithy phrase.
Yeah, he was an aesthete. He understood the importance of beauty.
Yeah.
He didn't think beauty was just an accoutrement. He saw beauty as important in and of itself, and so he was very critical of so much of our modern culture, which is essentially gets rid of the beautiful and replaces it with the merely functional.
Yeah.
And he saw that as a regression in our civilization.
Absolutely, some great life lessons there. We need to keep moving on. I want to get onto the re-establishment of family first. While going back to your parliamentary period, you met a man in the Parliament by the name of Pastor Andrew Evans, and he was the founder of Family First Mark I, along with his son Ashley. He was a Pentecostal minister, pastor of the largest church in Adelaide, largest church in Australia at the time, Paradise Assemblies of God. What did his arrival in the South Australian Parliament, what impact did his arrival under the guise of Family First have? Socially conservative, religious-based party having a parliamentarian turn up in Parliament would have been a bit disruptive, I'd imagine, at the time.
Yeah, he was a disruptor. So Family First sort of came out of nowhere. It's in its original iteration. And they contested, I think it was the 2002 state election is when Andrew was first elected. And they were organised. They had election signs all over metropolitan Adelaide. They had polling booths manned, and so it was. And so Andrew was elected. A little bit unexpectedly, and I think it was. He had an effect in the Parliament beyond just his vote. I mean, I think just his presence in the Parliament had a had an effect on everyone in the Parliament. He was just so obviously a man of God, and there was such a lovely gentleness to him, so he had a great deal of respect in the Parliament, from all sides, and I think he radiated Christ to all those around him.
Whether they knew Christ or not.
Yeah.
And he obviously campaigned on a range of issues, but he was particularly concerned about the breakdown of marriage, family, pro-life. What sort of impact was he able to have on those social policy issues during his time? He served, I think, 2 terms, certainly 8 years.
Yeah, I think he might not have served the full
not quite
2 terms.
The full.
He was elected twice. I think he might have had to retire sometime into his 2nd term.
That's right, and Dennis Hood took his place.
No, Dennis had been elected. I think Robert Brokenshire.
Sorry, my apologies.
Yeah. But obviously he was influential in that he had the balance of power in the Legislative Council. So the government often needed to go to Andrew to solicit his support in the upper house because it needed his support to put legislation through. And so Andrew had importance in that sense, but as well, it made people think twice. If they were advancing some piece of legislation, at the back of their mind was always, well, what's Andrew going to make of this? As much because of his wisdom and his integrity as a person as his vote, that he had that sort of influence. So he was a man of great influence. He had a big impact in the Parliament, way beyond just the vote that he carried in the Legislative Council.
Fascinating.
And I think I'm confident if Andrew had been there, and indeed if Family First had existed, the abortion to birth legislation introduced by the Liberal Party would not have proceeded. I suspect euthanasia wouldn't have proceeded, and a whole lot of other noxious pieces of legislation that have passed through the South Australian Parliament, since Andrew retired.
Let's come to that as we draw this to a close. So you were out of Parliament, but you and your good friend Tom Kenyon, also another member of the Labor Party and in the Parliament, also a fellow minister, both of you are out of Parliament by 2021 when the Liberals... and of course Andrew Evans long gone. Liberals introduced abortion to birth, as you said. At this stage, both you and Tom, your political careers are over, but you see this happening. It galvanises you, doesn't it?
Yeah, well, Tom in particular became very involved in the campaign to try and stop the legislation.
This is from outside of Parliament.
From outside,
as an activist.
Yeah, just as an activist. And so Tom was very involved. It was pretty shocking, really. I mean, Tom and I had used our influence within the Labor Party as much as we could to try and hold the line, and we successfully prevented euthanasia passing through the Parliament. And I guess we didn't expect that the highest priority for the Liberal Party, once it entered office, having been out of office for many years, I think almost 20 years they'd been out of office, among their highest priorities was to introduce abortion to birth and legalise euthanasia, and they did both. And we were a bit stunned by that, as were many traditional Christian Liberal Party supporters who had voted for the Liberal Party in good faith and did not expect that this is what they would do, and they did. And I recall hearing the story that in the Liberal Party room, when Liberal MPs who were opposed to the legislation asked the question, well, what about our Christian supporters? The answer from the Liberal Party leadership at the time was, well, who else have they got to vote for? They haven't got anywhere else to go. And it was hearing that remark which made me think, we really, Family First needs to make a comeback. We can't have a situation where where people who want to vote socially conservative have no alternative than the Liberal Party, because they can't be trusted. And
of course, Family First had folded back in about 2017, 2018. It had merged into Corey Bernardi's Australian Conservatives, which sadly didn't go anywhere. So there was this vacuum, and the Liberal Party could hold that view, or they got nowhere else to go to. So you and Tom contacted Andrew Evans, who was still alive at the time, long out of the Parliament, of course, and I think his son Ashley, and perhaps one of the some of the other early directors of Family First.
That's right. Yeah, no, I'd known them. Obviously from their day, from my days as a Labor MP and a Labor minister, and from their days with Family First, and really was a bit of a God moment because I spoke to one of the former directors, and he said, I can't believe you just called me because we were just on the brink. We had to make a decision about the Family First name and whether we were just going to relinquish it or not. And they were actually pondering that. And when I had that
this was Chris
inspiration.
Baker. I don't think he'd mind being named. Who's one of our federal executive at the moment.
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. And it was just as they were presented with that dilemma. What do we do? And I rang and said, what do you think about reforming, restarting Family First? So they were happy to jump on board.
So you got the band back together and or slightly reformed band with a couple of former Labor MPs, which I think shocked a lot of people. I think Andrew Bolt had a reflection on that when you made the announcement and you appeared on Sky News.
Yeah, Andrew Bolt said he was surprised that today 2 former Labor MPs had quit the Labor Party because the Liberal Party was too left-wing for them.
That says everything about the modern Liberal Party. So Tom then ran as the lead upper house candidate at the 2022 election. I remember seeing this happening. I was watching the news and I was quite energised by the fact that Family First was back and watched the election with great interest. Tom just fell short, unfortunately, but you did well enough to think that maybe there's something in this.
We did okay. I mean, particularly given the party had only been registered in January for a March election, so we'd barely had any time to prepare. We had no money, so we had to quickly raise funds to run any sort of credible campaign. And Family First had been off the scene for at that stage, 6 years, I think. So we did very well, considering that we'd had to do everything very without any real preparation.
And you surprised the Liberal Party a bit as well. You mentioned how they were taking the Conservative Christian pro-life vote for granted. You didn't always preference the Liberals, did you?
No. Well, in particular, there were a number of Liberal MPs who in marginal seats in northeastern Adelaide. So northeastern Adelaide is it's a sort of where the heart of sort of the Pentecostal movement is in Adelaide. So many people would attend Paradise Church there, and so Liberal MPs who'd been elected, including the Liberal MP who'd defeated Tom in his seat in the northeastern suburbs, had promised that they would vote pro-life and just completely betrayed that promise. So we were determined that we made that the litmus test for whether an MP would receive our preferences or not. If they had voted for abortion at birth, we would preference against them, including if that meant preferencing the Labor Party before them. And that certainly caused some controversy and some some anger, I guess, in the Liberal Party. We were criticised for that at the time, but it did send a message. Firstly, don't lie, don't promise you're going to vote some way, and then not, and that the pro-life vote was not something for the Liberal Party to take for granted.
No, very good. So here we are 4 or 5 years down the track, and we've been through a second South Australian election. You and I are both very disappointed that after 4 years of really hard work rebuilding the party, not just in South Australia, but right around the country, all of that work that we'd been doing since your 2022 election, since I had the privilege of joining you guys, was aimed at trying to get Deepa Matthew elected to the Parliament. We had the Bondi Massacre in December last year and a big surge of One Nation, and we saw that very much eat into our vote. But we've decided to continue because we think that we do have a distinctive to One Nation, as much as we said earlier that we admire their courage and their disruptive elements, but there's a need for a party that has the distinctives that Family First offers the electorate.
Yeah, indeed. I think what distinguishes us from One Nation is our belief that the family, is the fundamental unit of a flourishing society, that you need flourishing families, you need healthy families if you're going to have a flourishing society, that children have the right as much as possible to a mother and a father, that we shouldn't be engineering families where one parent is not going to be present, and that children need these things to flourish. And I think that's a different. I don't think that's something that One Nation particularly prioritise or necessarily believe in.
No, when we've just seen Pauline Hanson very recently on News 24 reiterate her support for same-sex marriage, and you can't have the sort of vision of human flourishing if that's your position about the structure of the basic group unit of society.
Yeah, no, indeed.
So in terms of a positive vision that we would be trying to postulate, it is one that would, as you were saying earlier, reorientate the economy in a way that removes the disincentives to family formation and allows them the conditions for flourishing, essentially.
Yeah, indeed. Government can't make people good, but it can create the conditions where it's easy to be good and to do things that promote human flourishing. So creating a society in which it is possible for one parent to remain at home and care for young children, where people are encouraged to, and the conditions are created so that it's possible to have multiple generations in a household, that families can look after their, to some extent, as much as possible, look after their own aged, that doesn't force institutional childcare on people who don't necessarily want it. Yep. I mean, I think that's just one of the greatest tragedies. People who have no choice but to put their very, very young children in institutional childcare, which we know is not good for your very young children, for babies, and create stress among those babies, and yet we continue to do it in the name, in a false notion of growing GDP and increasing participation in the workforce, as if that's the be all and end all, and puts aside what's best for families, how families and children best flourish, how to create a society with flourishing children, men and women.
Absolutely. No, look, it is a very different vision, and I think it's a unique vision, and there's so much more that we could say about our vision in terms of economics, and obviously we haven't got into the energy debate and all this, but we have touched on so much debt and health and all of these sort of things, and the fact that we're going to be forced to some hard decisions, and I think if a party like us can be articulating some of those, some of the tough truths, but also perhaps providing some of the answers as to how we can cushion the blow by re-establishing these family and community networks, that might provide some hope as we go into the future.
Yeah, indeed.
Jack, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you and hearing about your life, and it seems like you've still got the passion for politics, and that's good. We're going to need that in Family First going forward.
Thanks so much, Lyle.
Good on you, Jack. Thanks.
Thanks.
Well, over the weekend, I'll be hosting delegates from around the nation for the 4th Annual Family First Conference in Sydney. Keep an eye out for our social media. For highlights, we aim to put some of the talks online in coming days. Well, thanks so much for your company again this week. Don't forget to like and subscribe and share this far and wide. Until next week, keep speaking up.